there's so much to all of us, right? So there's some days where I feel like I'm a marine biologist, and then 15 minutes later, it's just all about being a dad, and then 15 minutes later, it's all about something else. And we're all so much more than the titles on our business cards or what we put on social media as our whatever we think we are there. And to that point, I wanted to let you know that music that we've been listening to, we are listening to right now, is made by Alex here. And yeah. And so I just wanted to kind of drag him up the front a little here. And so he's taken to recording the sound of the world around us. He's an incredible musician and hangs out with a group of musicians, and he's always just listening and paying attention at kind of another level, and I really appreciate his talent. So I just thought he could share just a few insights into what we've been hearing throughout these days. So, right, Alex.
I'm a musician, mostly a guitarist, and I also sing and I rap as well.
We might need to do that today. Or save it for tonight.
So I recently changed out a lot of my recording equipment to have a fully mobile recording studio, so that I could go to musicians and record them and combine it with people speaking, and just that kind of fell into this nature recording because I was out on a hike one day with my recording equipment and noticed that if I just turn the gain on the microphone way up with my headphones on, it gives me super ear, and I can hear all the little critters skittering in the grasses and the flapping of birds' wings and the rustling of leaves and people talking way off in the distance, and it's been this incredible experience. It's changed the way I listen to the world. It's also made me acutely aware of how difficult it is to escape the sound of people, especially our machines. I'll be out in the middle of Fort Ord or at Nichols and still hear the drone of cars way off in the distance or planes flying overhead. But Big Sur is one of the few places where I've been able to fully escape the sound of us, and it's mostly because we've got the mountains on one side and the ocean on the other. And so a lot of the music that I've been playing has been water recordings from in Big Sur, and I have a lot of other rivers and big thundering waves, but some of the best ones are just little ripples and tide pools and stuff, and then I use synthesizers to really enhance it and widen it, and I'm trying to combine it with music and try to transport people to those places, because sound is just such at least for me, it's a really critical part of my experience, and I want to help people who can't actually be in those places get to feel what it sounds like. So yeah, that's
beautiful. How do we access your music?
I'm on SoundCloud. I haven't published that much because I'm really good at starting projects and getting them to about 90%. But my personal motto for my music this year is that 90% is 100% done, and so I'm just going to be publishing a lot over the next few weeks. I have an album coming out that I put together with my friend Basham, who's on the other side of the world in Bahrain, and we're going to be working with Bobby and Sarah to incorporate some of that music into the Blue Mind documentary as well. But I'm on SoundCloud as Wiz Felicia.
On Instagram, you're...
Same thing, Wiz Felicia. My last name's Kalish.
How do you spell that, Kalisha?
Kalisha. Wiz with two Z's. I've been thinking about changing my artist name though, so I'm not sure. I can attach it to the resources document.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so as we get settled
back in the room. I want you to pick a partner, of course, any partner you want, and I want you to turn back to back with your partner, and I want you to change 3 things about yourself while you're back to back with the partner. So it could be like, you know, and then when you face each other, you turn around and you say, Alex, what did I change?
Put your foot in a different position. I don't know.
Okay, you got it? You're going to change 3 physical things about yourself. So pick a partner, you both change 3 things, and then I'll tell you when to turn around. Okay? So, quick game's a good game. Pick a partner.
We'll be competitive this time. Wait, let's see each other. Ouch. Okay.
Okay, ready? Turn around. And change 3 things about yourself. Change, 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 change. Change, change. Jody, you need a partner.
I know.
Come
It's
you
a
do
odd
it.
number of people.
Jane needs a partner.
Oh.
Changing. Okay, and on the count of 3, I'm gonna ask you to turn around. 1, 2, 3. Okay, tell them what they changed.
See more of your shirt.
Yeah, I just went like this.
Put your head down. Yeah, so bring your head down. So you've been in this room for
Are you sure?
It'll be interesting. Yeah. Raise your hand, keep going.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
I noticed you put on your head on your classes for
Yeah.
yeah.
I think we did that. I think we did that in one of the HP things. We said, okay, put your head down. What color? Is
How many of you?
Halfway. Okay, cool.
Alright, raise your hand if you got all 3 things. Here, a couple of you.
Very
Raise your
good.
hand if you got 2 things. Okay? 1. Did anybody get none? Well, take a seat. So often, change is really subtle. We don't notice that things are kind of changing little piece by piece, but all those changes make up for transformation. So I always was confused at kind of the 2 terms, transformation and change. And I was listening to this guy speak a couple years ago, and he was talking about digital transformation, which I have, if you ask me, I have no idea what that means. But he told this story about transformation, and he said the one way that he understood transformation is change means you can go back. Like you can always change back. But transformation is like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. That butterfly will never be a caterpillar again. And so as we think of kind of these things that we're trying to change, and social change, and leading positive change, and the actions that we're taking in our life, it's really about starting to create these transformations. And so Robert actually today spoke a little bit when he was being interviewed about Jay's story around Baja and sea turtles and some of the transformation that's happened here. And so we wanted to give an opportunity for Jay to speak and tell a little bit about that story here, and then open it up for you guys to ask questions, because it is a really awesome story of transformation, and one that definitely shows the breadth of the 7 ages. So,
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So you may have read, if you read the book Blue Mind, there's a little bit about the sea turtle story in there. Robert referred to it a couple of times. And I just want to sort of flesh out, take a few minutes and kind of tell you the story. And I'll go back to the beginning. And I'm sort of inspired by Van to go maybe share a few things that are a little uncomfortable. But my connection to sea turtles goes back to being adopted. And when when you're adopted, you have it's kind of a mixed up story about your origins, and we talked about that a little bit on yesterday. But the story that you carry is that your mom left you, That's, when you're a kid. And that doesn't feel good. But you figure out a way to tell the story maybe differently and not feel so bad. And so when I learned as a kid that turtles lay their eggs in the beach and they leave them in the beach and go away and let the sand and the ocean care for them, but the mom turtle never comes back, I was like, I like turtles. And then I met a few turtles and I held them and I was like, these are amazing animals. And we would catch turtles as kids in the Chesapeake Bay and paint numbers on their shells and throw them back in the water. And then sometimes we'd capture them again. And usually they wouldn't have numbers on their shells, but sometimes they did. And so we'd write that down. And I was really into math and turtles. And it was my favorite thing to do. It was play. It was just all about play. But I would dream about turtles and math, which I know sounds kind of strange. But and at some point, somebody along the way said, hey, there's this thing called wildlife ecology, or you could be a biologist. And I remember telling my dad I wanted to be a marine biologist. And he basically said that Jacques Cousteau already had that job. That was kind of basically the view of the world was, yeah, there's this one guy, he's the ocean man, and sorry. Yeah, but I love turtles. Without getting too pop psych on it, can't totally explain it. But fast forward a bit, and I decided that I would do graduate school studying sea turtles, and in particular working in Mexico. I'd been a double biology and Spanish major, and so I knew the Spanish language, and I knew I wanted to work in Latin America, so I love the cultures, and went to Baja California. And one of the first things we did is I met up with a friend of ours, the late, great Antonio Resendiz, and his wife Betty, and family in Valle de Los Angeles, which is a small town, bay on the east side of the Baja Peninsula on the Gulf of California. And I met a turtle. And we ended up naming her Adelita. And she had lived in this tank for 10 years in the care of the Resendiz family. And they had rescued her and kind of never wanted to let her go, I guess you could say. They were feeding her fish and squid. And she grew to be an adult-size loggerhead turtle, 223 pounds to be exact. And she lived in a tank that was about from here to that wall in diameter, round, which is, compared to the Pacific Ocean, is small. And she was well cared for. The tank was always cleaned. But it was time for this turtle to leave because she was resting her head always on the western wall. And so Antonio and Betty and my colleague Jeff Semenoff and I were able to get a satellite transmitter. We glued it to her shell. We took Adelita out of the tank, brought her to the Pacific coast of the peninsula, and let her go with the help of a group of fishermen who helped us with the satellite transmitter, with the epoxy, with the fiberglass. And we named the turtle Adelita after a man named Martin Arce, who was a lobster fisherman, whose daughter was named Adelita. So we named the turtle Adelita after the young Adelita. Turns out the name Adelita is significant in Mexican history. You've heard of Pancho Villa, Emiliano Zapata, and you've probably seen sort of, the images of them. Their female counterpart was called Adelita, and she was the woman who ran the food and the arms to the front line. And historically, it's the stuff of legends, and there are corridos, there's songs about La Adelita. Some of the most famous songs in Mexico are about this woman. So this was a revolutionary turtle, little did we know, named after a revolutionary figure and a little girl in a fishing community. So we put Adelita in the ocean, and my friend Bob filmed her release. And if I had one slide or one thing to show you, it would be the little video of Adelita swimming away. Because she swam, I'll try to act it out. Okay, ready? Right, imagine this is the panga, the edge of the boat. So Adelita gets released by this group of dudes into the water, swims about 10 meters, and then pauses. And it's kind of like her flippers go like that. Little transmitter on her back, pauses. And to my eye, it's her saying, where's the wall? There's been a wall about here. Every time I've swum across my tank this far, if I didn't stop, I banged my head really hard into a wall, and I don't like that. And so I don't know what she was thinking and saying to herself. If anything, I'm just imagining because, I know turtles. But so she swims, pauses, finding no wall, she continues to swim. Right? So she pauses. There is no wall. She's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's deep. It's open. She imagines a wall. She imagines it so clearly that she stops swimming for a moment. Right? So biologically, that's kind of interesting. But metaphorically, it's super powerful. And it wasn't for a few years of watching that video that I really felt that metaphor, which is we all have walls. Some of them are real. Some of them are physical, formidable. And some of them, as we were talking about, perceptual. There are walls that we make that, like that turtle, she imagined that wall. It was so real in her small turtle brain that it stopped her, physically stopped her. But it was water. There was no wall, right? And so she swam through that wall, and on the other side of that imaginary wall was 7,000 miles of open ocean. 7,000 miles of just clear shot. And so for 368 days without stopping, Adelita swam. Not sure what she ate or if she ate for 368 days. And by the way, one thing you learn about turtles if you study them, they will surprise the hell out of you every time. Every time you think you know what's going on, they will do something that will really blow your mind, sort of physiologically, biologically, just in terms of their resilience and their strength. So this turtle swam 7,000 miles from Baja California, Mexico, to Yakushima, Sendai, Japan, and without stopping. Simultaneously, the internet was being born. So this is 1996, this is 20-something years ago. Our advisors advise us not to put the data on the internet because, of course, if you put things online, people steal them. And I remember thinking, what would somebody do with stolen turtle data if they did steal our turtle data? And the only things I could think of were good. So we put Adelita's information online in real time. And guess what happened? More walls fell down. Teachers, scientists, collaborators, artists who were online on this new thing called the internet found Adelita, began to follow her, and started teaching math and poetry and geography and biology using Adelita's unfolding story. So over the course of 368 days, we would get messages from kids from all over the world, poems from teachers, from their kids that had written about Adelita. Kids were learning math, they were learning algebra, trying to predict when she would arrive to Japan. So this turtle just kept teaching us these lessons and offering these metaphors and these literal insights, not just in the realm of marine biology and conservation and ecology, although many of those, but this whole other realm that if you broaden your gaze, you would see. So from that year on, we began collaborating and working with fishermen, with turtle hunters who were called poachers because it was then illegal to hunt sea turtles. They were considered the enemies of nature. They were considered the people to fight against. But they, many of them went, one day they were turtle fishermen and turtle fisherwomen. And then the next day, because the law changed, they became poachers. That activity that had been part of their lives for generations, suddenly a law was passed, and that activity would wind them up in jail or with a huge life-changing fine. So we began working with groups of people in many communities to connect. It wasn't just to the Adelita story, although that was a piece of the conversation. It was, wow, these turtles who live here can swim all the way really around the planet back home. And there's this responsibility and this wonder and this awe that was shared, even among people who were eating those turtles and selling them for a living. That doesn't mean you can't also feel a massive amount of awe and admiration for the beauty of the animals. So Robert mentioned just asking the questions. Asking Martin Arce, how would you, I'd never attached a transmitter to a turtle before. Really, it was my first one. And so neither had he, but he had fixed a lot of boats with epoxy and with fiberglass. And so I said, Martin, this thing needs to be attached to this animal here. Let's talk. And so there was this sense of ownership that everybody involved in this project. This was our project. And so without getting into a massive amount of detail, because next week I'm taking my daughter Julia and we're going to Loreto, Baja California Sur for the 20th anniversary of the movement that started, and it's called Grupo Tortuguero, which means turtle people group. It's not it's a terrible name in English. It's a beautiful name in Spanish. And it formed 20 years ago, when a group of people, biologists, business people, fishermen and women, community members, teachers, 45 people got together in Loreto and decided, let's make sure these animals don't go extinct. And they were right there at the edge. We were told as grad students it was too late. If you looked in the literature, it was too late. They had been fished to ecological extinction, to commercial extinction. All that was left was just actual, literal extinction. And everybody told us it was too late. But I guess you could say we naively ignored them. Looking back on it, it was naive. It was based in this kind of belief in people and a love of turtles. And the group of people who gathered, we spent the day talking about this stuff. And at the end, well, at the beginning, we said everybody has a vote, everybody has a voice, everybody will be heard equally. We've got biologists and we've got multi-generational community members who've been hunting sea turtles like their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. And we talked about it. And at the end of the first meeting, we voted on two things. That we would meet again the next year, and then if we were going to meet again next year, we needed a name. And that's when we just named ourselves Turtle People Group, Grupo Tortuguero. And so every year for 20 years, that group has met and it's continued to grow. Now 50 communities, 50 coastal communities, from San Diego to Michoacan, are getting together every year to work together. And while there's a scientific basis to this and a social science basis, that's not really what's working. The science is cool, it's published, but a very small group of people will actually access those journal articles. It's something else. It's the heart-wiredness of this group of people. We are some of each other's best friends. Our families are intertwined. We ask after each other year-round, even when we're not together. We help each other. And together we've been working hard, fighting for what we love, which is these animals, among other things. We love the ocean that they live in, the coast that they require for their nesting beaches, and so on. And so together we've sort of beat the odds, did it in a way that was completely unacceptable from an academic perspective. I remember I could just go down the list of meetings with my committee members and the different things they told me not to do, or cautions, or even stronger than that. And it was, I was told it was career suicide several times, the things that we were doing. But, so I guess that was my answer. So what? And so I guess that the reason of sharing that story is to kind of, follow up on a couple of references that Robert made, but to just kind of show that the Blue Mind work didn't just kind of fall out of nowhere. It wasn't a pitch that I heard or received, or it came out of that 20-year effort, collaborative effort, and seeing what works on the ground, what works in real life, how you build movement in slow motion, so that the conversation we had about conversations, that they're not 15-minute conversations, and they might not even be 2-year conversations. They may be 20-year, slow, iterative, back and forth and up and down conversations. And so to kind of end with one example of one of the conversations, young man, was a young man at the time, Julio Solis. He was working with us as the captain of one of our research boats. And I never bought a boat because I always wanted to work with people who own boats. I figured if I bought a boat, then I would be the gringo with a boat. And then I would drive the boat, and I would get the gas, and then that would be one less reason to work together. It worked out so much better to not have a boat and to work with people who had boats. So Julio Solis had a boat, and he's a young man, and he was a poacher. Huatero is what he called himself. And he said, I can help you. You can pay me to help you. But by the way, I don't care about sea turtles, he told me. And I said, okay, sounds good. I need a boat. Day in and day out working together, he started asking different kinds of questions, like where do these turtles swim to, and where do they come from, and start, but he would remind me, I don't really care about sea turtles, and I could feel his love of these animals growing, and as that started to occur inside of him, he became more adamant about the fact that he didn't care about sea turtles very much, that it was just a job. And then one day, I remember, this is years in, he said, we've only eaten 3 sea turtles this year. And we would normally eat about 10 or 12 in my home. And I said, that's cool. It's kind of like Van's story, that's cool. Just kind of, I don't want to make too much of a big deal, but wow, your family saved 7 sea turtles. And so gradually, that relationship, that conversation continued over the course of over a decade. And Julio took over the project. He said, I'm not trained as a biologist, but I can do this. I see what you do. It's not that hard, dude. Really. The math, I got it. The tagging the turtles, got it. But filling out those forms you fill out, just give me extra copies. And so he took over the project, took over the funding, started his own organization as part of the Waterkeeper Alliance in Magdalena Bay. And then he showed up for the International Sea Turtle Conference, which is 1,000 people from all over the world, from 70 countries. And they gathered at the 10th anniversary of Grupo Tortuguero in Loreto. And Julio came, and instead of being acknowledged in the PowerPoint of a biologist, a trained biologist, he was the biologist. He got up, gave his PowerPoint presentation, knocked it out of the park, as expected. Learned PowerPoint, knocked it out of the park. Standing ovation. And just that moment right there, I remember thinking, this is how it works. This is the way this works. The idea of putting yourself out of a job, making your role irrelevant. And now as I prepare to go spend some time with my daughter in Baja, my job is maybe cheerleader. Maybe that's my job. Maybe just I'll be maybe recognized as the old guy, who back in the day loved turtles and came and started some conversations. And that I think is the mark of success, right? Is to be able to step back. And Julio and I have an agreement, which is when we're grandpas, someday we're going to be sitting on a beach, probably having a Pacifico, and there'll be some kids running around, and a sea turtle will swim by. And we'll look at each other, and we'll clink those beers, and have a little sip, and that's payday. That is our payday right there. It's just that knowing. and that feeling that we accomplished something and that it's just forgotten, for the process perhaps is forgotten in the textbooks, perhaps in the papers, but that's the goal, and we share that common dream, right? And so I could speak for about 3 weeks without breathing about the biology of sea turtles if you wanted me to, but I won't do that. But if anybody has any turtle-related questions or process questions, I'd be happy to chat about it.
Bigger than turtles and
Yeah.
process, which are important, but like this story, I've heard it in various links, is such an illustration of kind of the me we do across the 70s, from birth through to play, through to the lover and the fighter and the justice and the ebb and flow, and even in this story there was death, right? There's
Yeah.
been deaths and loss and things along the way, and I think it's such an amazing story because so often we have that wall that's there, and we hit that wall and we think, ooh, I'm going to turn around because that's going to be a little bit easier. But I think the perseverance of that and how you prepared yourself for that and how you aligned your community around you is key. And so I think the questions, yes, ask questions about sea turtles, but also think about how can you use this, right? Like how can you use this inspiration for you as you start to push through barriers, because we all have them. And being able to kind of access that as you go and have this story of something that helps to drive that for you too is really key.
And I think seeing the example of Julio and Martina Arce and in the region, those guys and their families are called on to talk about their version of the story, to inspire people who are working to protect sharks, to create marine protected areas, to restore fisheries, to fight all kinds of battles. And so this is a somewhat rare success story in the marine conservation field. And so they're this whole group, there's 1,000 Grupo Tortuguero members who are now able to speak their version of the story and share it, and maybe inspire or empower other people to do more. So while I had my turtle blinders on and I was very focused on making sure this species didn't go extinct, that also allows that rest of the story. Yeah.
Was it significant to actually resting on the west side?
Yeah, the question was it significant that we let her go on the Pacific side of the peninsula? Oh yes. Oh right. Yeah. It was. So that I look back on my field notes from my field journal from all those years of looking at her in the tank, and it's just one of those things you do as an observer, and whether it's as a scientist or as an artist, when you're observant, you write things down. And so I just always make note that she was resting her head on the west side of the tank. And then, lo and behold, when she had the chance to leave, she went due west for 368 days without, it's like she swam at 1 knot, which is about this fast, for 368 days, right? And did she stop? Hard to tell. Did she eat? I don't know. That could be another PhD dissertation. But, as a swimmer, so like try to sustain 1 knot for 368 days. That's like, it's phenomenal. And you go like, wow, this is it's like, talk about superhero powers that animals have. But starting out, she was resting her head on the west side of that tank. Yeah. Yep.
I was struck when you said at the beginning of the story that the goal was for the two of you, or the end idea of it, you no longer being part of it.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks volumes to this me, we, do idea, because so oftentimes it's a me thing, right? And we kind of, the people we is, but to transcend that and to really, it speaks volumes of this particular movement. It's not Jay's movement.
No.
The website's not.
Grupo
Renee is
Tortuguero.
very-
Yeah.
And so I think that speaks volumes. I think we've talked about that a
Yeah.
little bit. Just that the lack of humility in it all. That it's we and do, and but it's big stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the recognition that everyone this is something, this question of access. Everybody's accessing this conversation, their water. In that case, it was their turtle. And even that, it's the turtles of the world. But everybody's accessing this relationship from a different perspective. And it may be that there were times that sea turtle was the only thing to eat in some communities. Like that was it, that was what they had. There are times where maybe the blood was consumed as part of an important ceremony, because that's what people do. Where maybe it's on and on how these animals were important. And everyone comes into the water conversation through a different waterway, through a different portal. And to be inviting of it and respectful of it is part of that, right? And then figuring out what our different pieces are of fixing what's been despoiled and fixing what's broken. But that's not normally the way academia and government agencies and most nonprofit organizations approach problem solving. It's really not, there's a whole bunch of other boxes that are used. So
Isn't that how successful organizations approach?
maybe, I think possibly, I think that is, it worked with the black sea turtle in northwestern Mexico, and I think it's kind of working with this conversation. But I think my sample size is small, and I would defer to, to Amy and to Robert, who have a broader view, and to all of you who work on a whole range of issues around the world. Yeah.
Has there ever been a point in your career as a biologist where you were acutely aware that if you made a decision or influenced the community, it could go one extreme to the next?
Yeah, interesting. So there have been a couple of times along the way that there were just, without naming names or details, death threats. So that seemed like it would go one way or another, and one would be like better than the other, I guess you could say. And so I don't like to talk about that, because if I talk about it, and is this live stream on? And my wife doesn't like to hear about that part. Freaks her out. My kids don't like to hear about that part.
No, and it's not something you want to think about.
Yeah.
You want to be like aware, but also as like a biologist, like even like implementing a program or even coming in, and I've had personal experience going into kind of an untouched community and asking them what they want. What do they view their turtle population as,
Yeah.
and kind of seeing from their point of view, and just kind of knowing as a biologist, like you could go in there and be like, well, we're going to do this and this and this,
Yeah.
and you gain their trust, and then in a couple of years, like that project went south.
Yeah.
People took money out of the
Yeah.
pockets.
Well, so two things that worked in our favor. One was I had a view that beyond my degree, my plans for graduate degrees, I wasn't going away. Like at least, who knows what happens in one's life, but and I advise my students, like, if you're going to work with a community and your plan is to work for 2 years and never come back, be clear, because there are projects around the world that are left behind, and the world is littered with good intentions and big ideas and promises and campaigns or master's projects, and then so then the next person who comes to do some work and to collaborate or even to have a conversation is carrying that baggage. Frankly, that's the history of North American science in the world. So that just to say that clearly. So there's that component. So do what you say you're going to do it well, even if they're just small things. The other thing that worked in our favor, we had no money. Relatively speaking, right? So we had gas money. I had a 1972 International Travel Hall that mostly ran. Like 80% of the time it was running. And a TA salary at University of Arizona. Nobody would give us grants, so we scraped together a little bit of money that we had. We bought really, really ugly T-shirts that nobody wanted. We printed a turtle design on them. We sold them for more than we should have to people who, were sympathetic to our cause. And then we had some money, and that was our grant. The smart money was not on us. And I was told by Richard Cudney at the Packard Foundation and Sergio Nabel, who used to be at the Packard Foundation, is now at Sandler. Packard gave us our first grant, and it was $25,000. And it was like, woo, my gosh, what are we going to do with all this? And really, it was like, might as well have been $25 million. And he told me years later, relatively recently, that basically he considered that money burnt. He said, I just flushed that grant away. It was this discretionary grant. He's just like, this is not going to work, but here you go. And he's like, yeah, prove me wrong. But that's the kind of confidence that the funding community had in us. And I must say, same thing with Blue Mine. 0 for 20 on grants, 0 for 20. Did we stop? Here we are, right? That's sometimes how it goes, right? With Blue Mine, I didn't want to write that book. I wanted somebody else to write it. And I tried really hard to give it away, including to Oliver Sacks, who's the great late neurologist who loves water. And he didn't want to do it. He said, you do it. So I know there's some, that's just what happened, but there's some lesson in there. And I guess there's the perspective is that sometimes your ideas suck. Right? I mean, really, straight up. Sometimes you have an idea and then it's like, that's not a good idea, for real. And sometimes your ideas are good. And sometimes your ideas are good and people know it, and sometimes your ideas are good and at least the people around you disagree. And they may be your parents, they may be your academic advisors, they may be foundations, they may be your colleagues, they may be people you really respect, they may be your father-in-law. I've had the same experience with my father-in-law. They may be the people who raised you, yeah. And so you have to sometimes slog through that, and it can be unfun, really unenjoyable. So that's the fight. That's the fighter part a bit. You fall in love with something, you start to feel unstoppable. How much are you going to fight? You have to decide that, and then you're going to have to decide how you're going to come back when somebody holds a gun to your head or makes a very clear threat. And this, clearly is not. This conversation is not limited to turtles. I mean, it's all of the issues that we've been talking about, racial justice and same-sex marriage. I mean, all the advocates and activists I know in all of these arenas have dealt with more threats than I ever will. So you have to be safe, I guess, is really what I'm trying to say. In this world today, 2018, please be safe, right? You're needed. That's my takeaway from some of that is don't risk your life unnecessarily.
I'll just say thank you for sharing that story. And Amy and I have a brain book club where we read a lot of books about psychology and the brain, and we have a list of them in Hardwired. And your story that you shared reminds me of one of the books that Amy and I reference a lot, which is Iconoclast by Gregory Burns, the neuroscientist, talks about how to think differently. And one of the things that he says is that fear is often the biggest personal fear of our personal reputation, our professional reputation is usually and often one of the biggest barriers to transformative change. Because when you go out and say, hey, I want to do this research project to save sea turtles in Baja, Mexico, and people in Baja, California, people are like, that's a ridiculous thing. The human reaction is to say, okay, no one likes my idea, so it's going to go away.
Yeah.
And the transformative reaction is to say, screw you, I'm still going to do it.
Yeah.
And there are lots of examples
Yeah.
Of that. And so fear is often the biggest thing that we're doing. So
Mhm.
I just, for folks who are doing transformative change in the room, I imagine all of you
Mhm.
are, and where you feel like the biggest thing that is standing in your way is a group of people who you need to be on your side not supporting you.
Mhm.
It's a great and inspirational group.
Yeah, excellent. That brings up some, I think important topics in this work. Is I come at it from a score 20 out of 20 on the introvert test when I took it, whatever test that was. As a kid and all the way through grad school, I stuttered very badly. So standing here speaking to you, if you had asked me 20 years ago, would I be standing in front of the room making any sense, I would say no. Anytime I spoke at the front of a room, I made everybody very uncomfortable because of the way I spoke, and that made I could feel the discomfort. Which anyway, not even get into that, so I'll bore the heck out of you. But that perspective, so that to be able to pull back into myself and find something that worked and then move forward was something that I developed from a very young age. By just not wanting to speak, but just paying attention and then just doing my own thing quietly. And we all find our way to stand up again and keep going. And it may be because we're really brave and very courageous and just have that sort of naturally. I'm not. Like this scares me. Doing this workshop scared me. Giving a keynote, if you show me the back door right before I'm supposed to speak, I might go out it and run. But other people really are, have courage. I have something else. So that I think the point is finding what it is that you have that allows you to be unstoppable. And it's a different answer for all of us. Again, that's maybe another place to, another handle on this story. And it's love. For me, it's love. Like I remember thinking, if we don't do this for this species called the black sea turtle, I don't see that anybody will, and they will go extinct. And I love them so much. They've taught me so much. Turtles are my mentor. And so I remember that day where I thought, okay, we're going for it, and it was from a place of love, really more than anything. Yeah.
And one quick comment, because I don't know if you've been back in Los Angeles for several years.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to report to you that there are so many turtles now. And in '95 that was not the case. And it is insane. I have competitions with my students to see how many turtles they can spot. And they get up to 12, 13, 15, 20 in a boat ride just to the South Bay. It is nuts, and it's never been like that.
That's awesome. And to put that in perspective, so 1995, we had an Earthwatch team of paying volunteers to help. That's how we funded it. 2 weeks trying to catch turtles day and night with multiple nets, and we caught 0. And we caught algae, a lot of algae. And we had to consider refunding the volunteers, this Earthwatch model, skunked, right? And with expert turtle hunters, people we both know in the boat helping. And now to hear that is astounding. It's a success story for sure.
I really believe that the really huge piece of it that made it so successful, one of the things I think that was more transformational, and just take 60 seconds, but, and when after Evelita, and we had other opportunities to release turtles with satellite tags, there would be 10 different boats, all with Americans in it, to said, what are you doing? And he told me how special it was that 10 families got to take home money to their family because one turtle lived. And that attitude that he taught us, and that attitude that we've been able to carry on for so like that would not have occurred to me.
Yeah.
To hire specifically people who I knew how to do turtles.
Very cool.
I think to transition from that, thank you, is number one, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I know that thank you all and Jay for the work you continue to do, because it's not always easy. In fact, it's more often it's difficult than easy. So thank you for doing that work. And I think we're at the point of our day now where we're gonna wrap up and head out to kind of an afternoon of activity, but I really wanna bring it back to what we started with, which is the me, we, do, right? Today we really talked about the lever. We got to see what Allie does and some of her work and what kind of alivens in her when she does that work. We got to hear from Robert and Amy, right, about how do you get into this decision-making mode? How do you really make these heart-wired decisions? And then we got to hear Van's amazing story of the work he's doing and how he fights for that and how he's fought for a good chunk of his life, right, to get where he's at and to get these people where they're at to even share this experience. And then Jay, who I think really is a true representative of those 7 ages and kind of that long-term journey that we're all on. And so I'd like for you to start to think about what's the me, what's the we, and what's the do from today. So how is it relevant to you? What's the application? How is it relevant to the we, and not just these 25 people we, but the broader we, right? Our communities, our families, the people we interact with every day, and the people we don't. And then finally, what will you do about it? So thinking specifically about today, the lover and the fighter, what can you do? What's that one tiny micro behavior? So I want you to just sync up at your tables. I'm gonna give you 7 minutes. Just start to think about that and talk through it and write it down. Write it somewhere that you're gonna see it, so that you can remember, oh, this is why it's important to me. This is why it's important to me. And this is the one thing I said I would do. So I'm gonna give you 7 minutes. Please go to it. 7 minutes in heaven.
recognize, you know, what your strengths are, and then kind of like introspectively to almost know what your weaknesses are. Creating communities of like-minded interests that might approach something from a different perspective. I'm really bad at coming up with No, it's just like I'm just not. I don't have a lot of grand vision.
What? I'm gonna put it up here.
Exactly. That's exactly what I do well. Is that if somebody has an idea or a vision, I think about okay, like how do we operationalize that? How do we
We're halfway between San Francisco
structure, take an idea to a weekend.